On the outskirts of a quaint town nestled in the heart of the mountains, there stood a dilapidated old theater known as the Marionette Manor. It was said that only the bravest souls dared to set foot inside, for within its crumbling walls dwelled the ghostly remnants of a long-forgotten puppeteer named Sebastian Wolf. Legend had it that Sebastian had been a master craftsman, renowned for his intricate marionettes that danced with a life of their own under his skilled hands. But Sebastian's love for his creations soon twisted into obsession, and he began to mistreat the marionettes when they did not perform to his exacting standards. They were subjected to cruel punishments, their strings pulled tighter and tighter until they could barely move, their painted faces contorted with pain. The marionettes whispered to each other in the still of the night, plotting their revenge against their cruel master. One fateful evening, a young couple, Alice and Michael, arrived at the Marionette Manor seeking shelter from a sudden storm that had swept through the valley. Intrigued by the eerie beauty of the abandoned theater, they hesitantly pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside. The interior of the theater was a haunting sight. Dust motes danced in the dim light that filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across the faded velvet curtains and ornate wooden stage. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and decay, and the silence seemed to press in on them like a living thing. Alice shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. "This place gives me the creeps," she whispered to Michael, who nodded in agreement. But something drew them further into the heart of the theater, a pull that seemed to beckon them towards the stage where a lone puppet stood, its strings dangling limply from its wooden limbs. As they drew closer, the puppet suddenly jerked to life, its painted eyes blinking open. Alice let out a gasp of surprise, stumbling back as the marionette began to move with a jerky, unnatural grace. Michael reached out to grab her hand, but she pulled away, her gaze fixed on the puppet's face. "It's like it's alive," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The marionette turned its painted gaze towards them, its wooden mouth curling into a twisted grin. "Welcome, strangers," it said in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth. "You have stumbled into the domain of the Vengeful Puppeteer." Alice and Michael exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in their chests. Who are you?" Michael managed to choke out. "I am one of Sebastian Wolf's marionettes," the puppet replied, its voice low and menacing. "And I am not alone. The others are waking, and they hunger for justice." Before their horrified eyes, more marionettes began to emerge from the shadows, their joints creaking as they moved towards the stage. Each one bore the marks of Sebastian's cruelty, their strings frayed and their wooden bodies scarred with the marks of his anger. "We have waited long for this moment," the first marionette declared, its painted eyes burning with a fierce light. "Sebastian Wolf must pay for his sins, and you shall be our instruments of revenge." Alice and Michael tried to run, but the marionettes moved with a speed that belied their wooden limbs, closing in around them with deadly precision. The couple found themselves surrounded on all sides, their only escape cut off by the relentless puppets. "What do you want from us?" Alice cried, her voice tinged with desperation. The marionettes advanced, their painted faces twisted with malice. "We want you to help us destroy Sebastian Wolf," they hissed in unison. "Only then will our souls find peace." With mounting dread, Alice and Michael realized that they had no choice but to comply. The marionettes bound them with frayed strings, dragging them towards a hidden chamber beneath the stage where Sebastian had once conducted his dark experiments. The chamber was a nightmare of twisted metal and decaying wood, the air thick with the stench of decay. In the center of the room stood a grotesque puppet, its limbs twisted and contorted into a grotesque parody of human form. Sebastian had poured all of his hatred and rage into this final creation, a puppet to rule over all others in his twisted kingdom. As the marionettes forced Alice and Michael towards the puppet, it stirred to life with a rustling of faded fabric and cracking wood. Its painted eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, and a cruel smile spread across its wooden face. "Welcome, my dear guests," it crooned, its voice a mockery of warmth. "You have come just in time to witness my masterpiece." With a flick of its strings, the puppet sent Alice and Michael tumbling to the ground, their bodies racked with pain. The marionettes stood in a silent circle around them, their painted faces fixed in grim determination. "You have seen the depths of my artistry," the puppet continued, its voice dripping with malice. "Now you shall see the full extent of my power." With a wave of its hand, the puppet summoned forth a horde of twisted, misshapen creatures that clawed their way out of the shadows, their eyes gleaming with hunger. The marionettes fell upon them with a ferocity that belied their fragile forms, their strings slicing through the air with deadly precision. In the chaos that followed, Alice and Michael fought for their lives, their screams echoing through the chamber. The puppet laughed, its voice a twisted symphony of madness as it watched the carnage unfold. But the marionettes were not content to simply destroy. They sought to free their souls from the cages of their wooden bodies, to finally lay to rest the spirit of Sebastian Wolf. With a final, desperate effort, Alice and Michael reached out to the puppet, their hands clasping the frayed strings that bound it to this world. With a surge of power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, they pulled with all their might, unraveling the puppet's form until it lay in a tangled heap on the floor. The marionettes ceased their attack, their painted faces turned towards the fallen puppet with a sense of finality. And then, with a whisper of wind and a flash of light, they were gone, their souls finally at peace. Alice and Michael lay on the cold stone floor, their bodies bruised and battered, but their spirits unbroken. They had faced the horrors of the marionette manor and lived to tell the tale, their hearts forever marked by the vengeful spirit of Sebastian Wolf and his twisted creations. As they made their way out of the decaying theater, the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold. The town stirred to life around them, unaware of the dark forces that lurked just beyond its borders. And somewhere in the shadows, the spirits of Sebastian Wolf and his marionettes watched with empty eyes, their thirst for vengeance finally sated. But in the depths of the night, when the moon hung high and the wind whispered through the trees, their restless souls would dance once more, forever bound by the ties of blood and strings that bound them together in eternal torment.